Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving up your time to hear about genetics and the role of genetics in the whole farm system and in a value chain context. So I want to talk to you about what is the National Livestock Genetics Consortium, what are the goals and what are we aiming to achieve by establishing a consortium, and how can you get involved as industry participants. I want to really tap into what is the role of genetics and how do we position genetics to predict consumer outcomes. If we can link the investments in genetics to predicting how to better meet or exceed consumer expectations, we can add a lot of value to the industry. And then I want to talk about the investments that are shaping the future that are totally complementary to the work that we're doing in genetics and along the value chain. And you heard before about the technologies and some of those innovations and how do we fit all this together to help achieve where we're going in the future as an industry. So I'll start off with the National Livestock Genetics Consortium. So the aim of the consortium is to attract around $100 million of investment to achieve a 4-to-1 return on investment. We'll only achieve that return on investment if we double the annual rate of genetic gain in the commercial beef industry. So I'll unpack a bit more around the strategy that the National Livestock Genetics Consortium Task Force have established. So the first pillar in that strategy is world-leading R&D. A really important part of our R&D is to understand, well, how do we know if we have achieved success? Well, we need to establish the baselines for our genetic progress and ensure that we measure the benefits of those investments off that basis. The other really important part is to make sure we don't lose sight of what the end game is, and that's improving the eating quality outcomes that we can achieve through genetics. A really important part then is what role can technology play? Genomics is a critical factor, and cheaper, cost-effective genomics is a game changer for our industry. What it can do to help link the whole value chain, as well as multi-breed analysis, head-to-head comparisons of all breeds on the one platform, so that you can make the best selection decision across all breeds, across all animals, so that we can make the biggest rates of genetic gain. But that really does require a culture change. How do we value genetics? We'll be moving away from looking at genetics in isolation and really positioning genetics in the whole farm system and looking at what is the genetic contribution in addition to all your other management decisions that you need to make in your production system, including health, including nutrition, welfare, reproduction, and of course genetics. And what is the end game? How do you establish your breeding objectives and how does your genetic selection fit within your production environment and your target markets? And that becomes really important. So we won't be promoting genetics in isolation, we need to put it into context. And then we also need to look at not only genetics but all other technologies to improve efficiencies within our production system, take out cost, and really nail our market specifications. The seamless transfer of information is a major blocker in our industry. So if we can solve how we can make sure that information seamlessly transfers to all owners of livestock through the value chain, making sure all of that production information that is collected through your system on farm, through post-farm gate, making sure that you're accessing and utilising MSA feedback, you'll have DEXA feedback, you'll have brand specifications and market signals that you need to translate into making decisions. And that will also help inform when you're setting up your breeding objectives and your target market and everything else in between, how best to use that information to inform your decisions going forward. But we're working now with partners in all aspects to develop these R&D programs. If I look at the latest level of investment that we have, there's, as I said before, we're approaching $100 million of new investment since the formation of the Genetics Consortium at the end of 2016. That's in addition to our previous commitments. But when I look at how do we fund that, you might be asking, well, there's only so much levy dollars, and that's right. If I look at the beef industry and the investments that we've attracted through the Genetics Consortium, 85% of that investment is through the MLA donor company. So the MLA donor company is matching private investment that's coming from universities, state departments, service providers, and other commercial partners, and we match that with $1 from the government. So there's no levies in 85% of that investment. The levy investment goes towards developing the breeding evaluation, and delivering the outcomes of that R&D through extension and our adoption activities. So we really have this unprecedented level of investment in genetics, and as a result of that private investment, you've got people with skin in the game who are invested in achieving the outcomes that we are striving to achieve. So that's really exciting. And I think this is a game changer where we're really thinking about how the role of genetics influences the whole production system and how do we better meet or exceed consumer expectations. And we need to flip the whole supply chain on its head and work from the consumer back. So if we're meeting or exceeding consumer expectations, the brand owners can capture additional value, pass those market signals back to you as a producer, giving that feedback back to you in the form of market specifications, MSA feedback, yield information, back into the commercial sector. Then when you're purchasing bulls from your seed stock producers, you can make more informed decisions with more accurate breeding values and better predictions of the performance of the progeny of those animals. Then when we look at reference populations, the reference populations are our biggest area of investment through the consortium. They're very well measured animals with all reproduction and production traits being measured. We've got genotypes and pedigree on their progeny and taking those animals right through to slaughter, where we're collecting cuts and taking that product right through to consumer sensory testing. So we actually have the end-to-end in our research investments, and we can turn that into commercially available animals that have direct linkage back into those reference populations and dramatically improving our accuracy of selection. The other big change in our breeding evaluation is the introduction of single step. Now, I'm a fairly simple person, so I'll try and give it a fairly simple explanation. That just combines pedigree, performance information, and the genotypes in one go. So the end result is a genomically enhanced breeding value. And what does that mean? More accurate breeding values, better ability to predict the outcome from the size that you select within your production system. It's world first, world leading in both sheep genetics and major beef breeds who have adopted single step. The other big change for our industry is when we then get into the language in which we use. The language that's housed within AusMeat is 30 years old, and it has really done a fantastic job to get us to where we are in terms of how we describe our product, both domestically and internationally. But we need to become more outcomes focused as an industry. And the beef industry invested in a review of the language that gives us the opportunity to really modernise the language and to really evolve the language from the system that we have today. And a good practical example of that is when we look at eating quality. So when I look at the MSA index and I map the index against dentition, a lot of our product is sold in international markets and domestically by alternate category ciphers. That's yearling, young, young prime, prime, steer, and cow, and manufacturing product. But if I map the eating quality index across the different dentition categories, there's not a lot of variation. There's as much variation across a dentition category as there is between them. If I then look at that and said, well, as a brand owner, what do my customers want? Well, they want to know what's good, better, and best. So if I remap the same animals, there's 2 years worth of data here, around 6 million head of cattle in this data set. You can start to see that if you were just selecting for those better end MSA index outcomes, you can start to differentiate by brand segment just on that good, better, best approach. So we can move beyond just dentition and look at the outcome. How was the animal raised? How much marbling did it have? How heavy was it at that age? What production tools were used in its life that will actually give us the outcome to better meet or exceed a consumer expectation? The biggest change, the most debatable change and recommendation in the language review was development of an eating quality graded cipher. It was also the first recommendation from the language review that was implemented commercially. There's 3 supply chains now exporting into 3 countries internationally, Japan, Korea and China, and that will grow. We're working with the Department of Agriculture to rapidly expand the list of countries that we can send this product into. But what I worry about is how much money we leave on the table. If we look at the price differentials around MSA, and this is used as a guide, we collect this information through the National Livestock Reporting Service, the difference between an MSA and a non-MSA YG animal is 23 cents a kilo. For the feedlot sector, it's around 11 cents a kilo. For grass-fed producers, that worked out at $65 a head, just in price difference. It was $130 million returned back to producers in the last financial year. That's a fairly compelling reason to start thinking about how we produce better outcomes for the consumer. Where we have left money on the table is just compliance to MSA requirements cost the industry $12 million. If we think about the cost of non-compliance more broadly than MSA, you can easily come up with a number around $50 million just in non-compliance to market-driven specifications. If I then look at what is the opportunity if we become more outcome-focused, and this is looking at just 16 and 17, so one financial year's worth of data of MSA-eligible cattle, and these cattle were discounted by 5 and 30 cents a kilo because they had 4 and 6 teeth, but they would have been above the average MSA index. For the supply chain, there was an extra $46 million in lost opportunity if we became more outcome focused as an industry in 1 year. So how much better can we do? I think that's really, the upside opportunity is enormous. I won't spend too much time talking about objective measurement technologies, but we have these on the stand at the MLA site. So there's a hyperspectral camera, which is, we're investing in technologies that replace the subjectivity in our carcass assessment. And the hyperspectral camera is showing some promise. Eye muscle area, rib fat thickness, marbling, meat colour, and we're hoping it can also measure attributes that are beyond what we can see in the carcass. Dual energy X-ray, lean, bone and fat. At the moment we have carcass weight and P8 fat being collected. Imagine how that changes when we have a full body scan. And then we've got some simple technologies, the NIX colour sensor. Again, this is available for you to have a look at on our stand. Just a simple little device, you can sit it on the eye muscle area and it will automatically tell you the colour of the meat and just works on an app on your phone. So there's a lot of different options. Come across to the MLA stand and you can see some of these devices. Another one is looking at, can we predict animals that are going to cut dark on farm before we consign them? And if we can identify them on farm, can we manage them differently so that they don't cause some of these issues in market spec compliance, particularly in relation to dark cutting high pH meat? The FLIR camera, we have one of these at the stand as well, is looking at the temperature of the eye and seeing if body temperature and consistency of that temperature where the eyeball isn't being influenced by the ambient temperatures, or you can see the different colours on those animals where they're rubbing, hot and cold areas. But we followed these animals from King Island across on a boat. We took measures on farm, on the boat, at unloading, at the plant, and then we collected blood samples from those cattle, took cuts right through to consumer sensory testing, and we're looking at the results, and it's showing promise, but we haven't quite nailed it yet, so there'll be more work in this space as well. And really what I wanted to leave it with you today was, where are we heading as an industry? And by 2025, the idea is that we have cheaper genomic tests. It becomes routine. You start breeding animals for end market specification compliance. We've got objective measures of both live animals. We've got lean meat yield prior to cutout, objective measures of eating quality traits. Then brand specifications are reflecting quality, yield and customer requirements, and the pricing incentives reflect that as well. So you start getting paid on the value of the carcasses that you produce. The cuts and portions are linked back to the live animal and the producer, as Sean showed in the supermarket of the future. A consumer can pick up that tray of meat and know what quality it was, where it was from, who produced it, and what production technologies were used in its production. So I think that's really where we're going as an industry, and it's pretty exciting to be here, and happy to take some questions at the end during the panel session. So thank you.